Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into another first beer from a new brewer to me. Today's is going to be an India Pale Lager from More Brewing Company. They're based in Huntley, Illinois. This beer is called Partially Cloudy, clocks in at 5.1% ABV, and it was brewed and dry hopped with Amarillo, Citra, and Motueka hops. So first things first, label art. It says partially cloudy, and indeed they've got this nice little colorful scene there. Partially cloudy with the sun rise or set, a nice little dock, and the crystal blue water. Looks absolutely lovely. So let's just get this one cracked gently. Okay, perfect. We're going to pour this into our nice big all-purpose glass. Ooh, wow, very pronounced aromas coming off of this. You can definitely tell that they dry hopped it. Right, I'm going to slow that down. Not going to get the whole thing in there as it creates that lush head. Visually, this looks very much like an IPA. It's an India Pale Lager, so not too much surprise there. Very bright yellow. It's almost kind of on the border between the lighter side of an IPA and say a Helles or a Golden Ale. That's kind of the color spectrum. So it's not straw color like a Pilsner. It's got a little more depth of yellow to it. It looks very nice. Obviously, I doubt the camera's picking it up, but the carbonation is extremely active. Tons and tons of beads I can see just rushing like crazy in there. The majority of which are super fine, super tight, tiny bubbles, which obviously helped with the creation of this tremendously thick, creamy head on top. So let's get right up over it for a full sniff. Wow. That's pure fruit. It smells like a mix of orange and grapefruit and pineapple and papaya. A little suggestion of passion fruit on the back as well. But it smells very fruity. I didn't get any earthy aromas coming out of this at all. No pine, no resin, no floral. It's all entirely fruit and essentially a blend of tropical and citrus fruit aromas. It smells, gosh, that just smells fantastic. Wow. So, India Pale Lager, don't have these too often. It's just an IPA, but, you know, lager yeast and lagering process versus ale yeast. So let's jump right in and see what this one's about. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a nice beer. It's got a lot of layers of flavor. So this puts me in mind very much of almost a New England style IPA. And the way that they did it, they used these specific hops, obviously draw out a lot of aroma. They dry hopped with it, and kind of the similar theme of not going so heavy into the boil to extract the alphas in there. So yeah, this one has a nice little bit of bittering, but it's not as bitter as, say, your average IPA. It's much more akin to the bittering of like a kind of lighter end of bittering that you would get from New England style or a hazy. So they're focusing very clearly, obviously here, on aroma and other underlying flavor characteristics that the hops have and drawing them into the beer versus going for intensity of bitters. It's very nice. It's very clean. As this is a lager compared to their ale counterparts, the body on this is very much a light to medium light body. It's not heavy at all. It feels where I would expect a lager in this ABV range to fall, but it definitely has a little less oomph, a little less presence, a little less heft than its India Pale Ale counterparts, to be certain. Mouthfeel on this one, very similar story. It's got a little bit of resistance, but again, not quite as much as you get on an ale versus a lager. And it's got a nice bit of creaminess when you agitate around the palate. So that is quite evident. So it does share a lot of common traits that are a lot more akin to lagers, albeit done in kind of a traditional ale style, just in lager form. Very nice beer. So there's a lot to pick apart in the flavor profile here. Honestly, I want to jump in for a second sip because I was really paying much more acute attention to texture and weight. So I'm going to jump back in. I can tell you there are lingering flavors on the back of the palate, so the finish on this is impressively long. But we're going to jump back in, let those flavors re-intensify, pick apart exactly what we're getting, and we will talk about this finish. Nice beer. On first sip up front, you're definitely hit with kind of a papaya and passion fruit flavor. There's a little bit of almost just like a light bit of orange juice mixed with pineapple juice, like 3 parts pineapple to 1 part orange comes in behind that. So a lot of the aroma characteristics of the hops are translating in directly into flavor profile in this beer as well. And that's really all I'm getting on the fruit side. It's a majority of what you got on the aroma. Tastes like those actual fruit in real life in the flavor profile. But what I couldn't pick up at all on the aroma, 100% on the flavor profile, the bittering on this is definitely earthy. That's where it is. And there's almost just the slightest twinge of pine in there. I am sure that's coming specifically from the citra hops that they used in this. But yeah, very, very nice. So not as bitter as your average IPA, more akin to a New England style. And it's not a real intensity of bitters, but after about the 10-15-ish second range, when the kind of fruit flavors open up and they start to dial back, that's really when the bitters start to open up and they just continue to intensify. So the initial reaction of, okay, there's some bitters and they're really not that pungent, it actually does progress kind of like the flavor blooming. So it gets more and more bitter, and then it too kind of dials back its intensity, but it slowly steps down. So it's got a very, very, very long finish. Honestly, an impressive finish. Impressive. This is far more impressive than your average New England IPA in terms of length of finish. And it really is this earthy and just slight suggestion of resinous quality that's lingering on the back of the palate. And as expected, it's nice and wet to the end. Even though it is a lager, this does not have a drying effect like you would get with a Pilsner on the back. It's still nice and wet and full to the end. Overall, this is a fantastic India Pale Lager. Absolutely packed with aroma, absolutely packed with flavor, 100% delicious. I am a fan. I'm going to take my time, sip on this one, come up my scores. When we come back, we'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was More Brewing Company's Partially Cloudy, an India Pale Lager clocking in at 5.1% ABV. More Brewing Company is based in Huntley, Illinois. So starting with the aroma on this was absolutely fantastic. They did dry hop this one, and it was very, very evident. Tons of citrus and tropical fruit jumped right out at you. Absolutely amazing. The aroma does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the taste, I loved it. I loved it. India Pale Lagers tend to be not quite as intense, not quite as robust of beers as their ale counterparts, but due to the nature of lagers, even though they have these hop-based characteristics, it's kind of like the best of both worlds, especially if you don't want something quite as heavy, because lagers do obviously tend to be lighter and they take on a much more smooth profile. That was very evident here. The bulk of the fruit aromas that you got on the nose translated into the flavor in the glass, and then there was this nice earthy and resinous kind of bittering from the hops came through, and it absolutely delicious. Taste does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the body, this was light, medium light, as expected on a tick over 5% lager. It does get a perfect 10 out of 10. Mouthfeel. Mouthfeel on this was nice. Not as resistant as its IPA counterparts. The IPL still had a little bit of resistance, not dissimilar to a typical Pilsner, about that same kind of feel. This one got really nice and creamy when you agitate it around the palate, exactly as expected. The mouthfeel does get a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this really surprised me pleasantly, and it was quite long. The bitters really intensified on second sip, and each successive sip as I was drinking on this beer. But even on the very first sip, I was thinking, you know, the bittering is there, but it's not very intense at all. But what left, the residual kind of resinous and earthy kind of bittering on the back end, really lasted an impressive amount of time. I mean, I didn't expect it. It was absolutely incredible. The finish does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did a tremendous job. Honestly, it looked very much like a Pilsner head. Fantastic. Stuck around the whole time. Head and retention does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the appearance, this was a little bit lighter than your average IPA, but still in that same color spectrum. And, you know, lagers tend to be a little lighter. This kind of reminded me of a cross between like a Helles or a Kirsch. Intensity of yellow mixed with maybe a golden ale. So nice, true, bright yellow, as expected. Appearance does also get a 10 out of 10. For the balance, overall, I thought the balance on this beer was absolutely top notch. For me, the only thing I kept coming back to as I was sipping on this and really scrutinizing it, coming out with my scores, was given the relative lack of bitters, although they did help extend the finish and tasted really nice, I would have liked still just a little bit more, and I certainly would have liked to have noticed what the underpinning grains were. I really got no sense of the grain bill at all, and I really found myself wanting that, especially in a lower ABV beer such as this, but minor nitpick, I only docked 1 point. Balance gets a 9 out of 10. Feeling and intangible, subjectively, I loved it. It gets a perfect 10. Finally, as an example of the style, well, it swept all but one category, and it definitely earned it. This does also get a perfect 10 out of 10 as an example of the style, which brings the total score on More Brewing Company's Partially Cloudy to a 99 out of 100. This is probably the single best India Pale Lager I've ever had. I absolutely thought they nailed it. It had all of the character traits of and the soul of a lager, but with the hop intensity and creativity of an IPA, and that is just a tremendous beer style. It's a great accessible beer style, especially since this wasn't overly bitter. It had enough that if you're a real hophead, you would still really appreciate what you got out of this, but it wasn't so intensely bitter like your typical IPA that it would shy people away that don't like bitter beer. Very accessible, absolutely delicious. This one I rate is probably the top IPL I've had to date. If you see this one, do yourself the favor and grab it. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.